have nuclear power. And that's just in some inventions. Let's look at the medical side. What we've had changed so much. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of you had medical procedures like hip replacements or knee replacements? It's amazing. Whenever I had surgery for an intestinal problem, I was in the hospital for almost 3 weeks. Now they're there for just a very short time. They used to cut you wide open, now just a little pinhole, and your surgery's open. What amazing progress we've made in medical line. Let's talk about just a little bit about the cost of the basic needs. How many remember when bread was 29 cents? Gas. Yeah, there you go. And clothes. How cheap they were. Cars. I can remember when it was a big thing when I paid $3,500 for a brand new car. Now I probably couldn't even get a doorknob for that price. And our houses. I was scared to death. First house I bought, $6,000. How am I ever in the world going to pay that off? Isn't that amazing? And now, people are $150,000, $200,000, $250,000. It's outrageous. I don't know how they do it. Well, I'm glad they can, but I can't fathom this. And I'm sure some of you can't either. How much the cost of things have progressed. And that's the same way in our lives. We have change in our lives. How many of you can remember your first child? That cute little child you held in your hands. And you, kitchen, that's fine. And you took pictures and you passed them around and all of that. And then you ran into what they call the terrible twos. And you tell them, Johnny, don't do that. Get out of there. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And then they go to school. And they get to be a mischievous person. And I'm speaking a lot from personal experience. That starts their learning abilities. Because they're in school. They're socializing with other people other than mom and dad. And it's a learning process. Then they grow on, and they become a teenager. And they get a little wild. They get a little independence. Good example is that, and I've told Jerry this a couple times, that one day I come out of a building, which was actually a pool hall, and there was my mother standing there. It's amazing how they find these things out. Yes. And then you go on, some teenagers or young people choose a path because you have a choice that they get into trouble. They get involved with drugs, smoking, and other things that they shouldn't. Stealing. Every day nowadays we hear that these teenagers are shooting each other. This morning some woman was teaching her daughter how to drive, and someone shot her through the window of the car. That's amazing. But then you also have some others which don't get the recognition that they should today. And they go and they become young ladies or young men. They make a life for themselves. They are grounded in the church. We have teenagers here in our church who are well-grounded. They have been taught the proper way to go. And this is just great. Then there are some, like myself, who just made it out of school. I've always said I was 341 out of 365. So all I wanted to do was get out. And they finally let me out. But as we go on, we find out that sometimes we have to have a little more education. Some of us go through higher education. When I got out of school, I found out that I couldn't get a job without higher education proceed from there. As I said, I chose the service because I didn't know what I really wanted to do. And I spent 4 years, as I said, in the service. 3 of them, I didn't see very much sober life. I was drunk most of the time, 24/7, I like to say. It is a time when you are existing. Now, let me back up a little bit in my presentation here. When I was about 11 years old, 12 years old, because my mother took us to church every day or every week, I had woke up one night in the middle of the night and I had a vision. And I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior at that time. But as you can tell, as you go through life, things change. You choose which way you want to go. At that time, all I was trying to do, and I believe this, was ignore life completely. That's why I was drinking. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I was going. So what do? You take the easiest way out. At that time it did. Whenever I was ready to leave the service, I quit drinking because I come to the point that I drank so much that I was throwing up blood. That's not good. It's very dangerous. You die very quickly. But God still had his hand on me. And he may have allowed me to get through that period of life that I needed. Many of the people who get involved in unsavory ways in their life, some will turn back to the church. And they try to create a life like I did, where you grow up with a little happiness in your life. You go back to church. In my case, I got married, I started settling down, and I decided if I wanted to do something, I needed to go back to school. I did. I went to Mississippi, to the theological college down there, and they told me I could sing. That was a mistake, wasn't it? But my wife, who was a master on piano and voice, worked with me for a while. And we traveled all over the East Coast to different churches, and been all the way over to Texas and basically up and down in a lot of churches. I led the music in the churches, which I really, really enjoyed. It was a great learning. As I've said many times, and I've even told the choir and others, what a message you get out of music. I believe in music completely. So, because God had his hands on the people who wrote that music, because there is a message in all of that music. Then, like most people here, I ran into a little bit of a problem. And my wife didn't want me anymore. That's a general way of putting it. And we got divorced. At that time, I had the clothes on my back, 21 cents in my pocket, and a car payment, and stuck in Mississippi. My parents were understanding. They helped me get back to Pennsylvania. I went back to work for a company that I worked with before, Sherwin-Williams. Some of you know them. No offense there, Romeo. PPG is an excellent company. But I worked with them for many years. And I thank them for that. But whenever you run into problems like that, when I had no employment and no college, I was in debt up to my ears. I was suffering from depression over the divorce. Something kept me going. And I've read this to you before, but I'm going to read it to you again for the simple reason it did help keep me on track. And it's a poem called Footprints in the Sand. Many of you may know it, but it definitely answers a lot of questions. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the each seam, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there was 2 sets of footprints, other times there was 1 set of footprints. This bothered me, because I noticed that during the low periods of my life, when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could see only 1 set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, you promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I've noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have only been 1 set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, you have not been there for me? The Lord replied, the times when you have seen only 1 set of footprints is when I carried you. And how he carries us, even without us knowing it. I appreciate that poem. It's been very helpful to me in my life. And that brings us back to the point that when we call on God, he is there for us. And are we all safe in the Lord because we were raised in the church, like I was? And the answer to that is no. The Old Testament, it was here somewhere. In Exodus, it tells us, Exodus 3:13 and 14,